I'm Ned Wenlock, the creator of Tsunami from Pow Pow Press, and this is the True North Country Comics Podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics Podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book and graphic novel creators and supporters. I'm John Swinimer. On this episode, I chat with Ned Wenlock about his creative style, his graphic novel Tsunami from Pow Pow Press, and more. Please like and subscribe to this website by hitting the subscribe button so you'll be notified about new podcast interviews and article posts. This podcast is available wherever podcasts are enjoyed. Please like, follow, and subscribe. Originally from the United Kingdom, Ned Wenlock is an award-winning designer, animator, and comic creator now based in Wellington, New Zealand. His short films and videos have played in festivals around the world, and has worked with clients such as the band MGMT. Ned's comics have appeared in respected anthologies Faction and Bristle, and he is featured artist in From Earth's End, the Best New Zealand Comics. Tsunami, his debut graphic novel, first published in New Zealand by Earth's End, won the New Zealand Book Award for Children and Young Adults for Best First Book. Canadian-based Pow Pow Press has published Tsunami for a worldwide release. The story of Tsunami goes like this. Peter is a misfit, an awkward 12-year-old who's mercilessly bullied in school and quietly ignored at home. Peter's lonely life in small-town New Zealand is upended by the arrival of Charlie, a badass girl who might just be the friend Peter's been needing. But when Peter's bullheaded commitment to the truth brings him into conflict with Gus, a troubled and violent classmate, things quickly spiral out of control, and the two boys find themselves in a terrifying situation neither of them could have imagined. So without further ado, here's my chat with Ned Wenlock about his creative style, his graphic novel Tsunami from Pow Pow Press, and more. So Ned Wenlock, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
You're welcome. Thank you for, inviting me.
No, I appreciate your time. Before I get going with all the questions, I would like to know, what was the first comic book that you read?
The first comic book that I read probably be something like Tintin. I was a huge fan of Tintin growing up. And actually, I didn't learn to read until a little bit later in childhood, so probably about the age of 9. So comics were a really great way to get into storytelling and stuff like that.
Very good. Yeah, that's definitely a good inspiration for a lot of folks I talk to. Absolutely. I'm wondering now, who or what inspires you to create today?
I've just recently picked up a whole load of books by Yoshihiro Suge. These kind of Japanese comics from the 60s and 70s. I love his sense of humor in his books. They're quite dark and quite sort of gnarly in some ways, but through it all, there is this sort of line of humor where he's very self-depreciating. So yeah, there's one example.
So we're here talking about your debut graphic novel, Tsunami. Now, I understand it has been published by Earth's End in New Zealand, which is where you're from.
Correct.
But now it's being published worldwide by Pow Pow Press. So with that in mind, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the story. What is Tsunami all about?
Tsunami is about a young boy, age 12, Peter, who is basically in his last 6 weeks of what we call over here primary school in New Zealand. And he's just going through that kind of coming of age time where all his classmates are starting to change going into what will be high school for them. But he is basically a very stubborn individual and very righteous in his stubbornness and refuses to change. There are things that happen in the book in terms of bullying and things like that. And he is a sort of an antagonistic protagonist in some ways, and basically doesn't serve himself very well at all through the story.
Yeah, it was very relatable, I think, from an aspect where a lot of people can read a lot of their own selves into the story. In fact, I was reminiscing, going, "Oh my gosh, yes, that's what a lot of people go through when they go through school. It's not unique in that way, so we all share it." So, as I'm reading the book, I'm wondering, is it autobiographical?
There are elements of autobiography, definitely. The story itself is not, but I picked this time because I basically emigrated to New Zealand when I was 13, on my 13th birthday. And I had 6 weeks of New Zealand primary school before high school started. And because it was my first 6 weeks in New Zealand at school, I have a good memory of that time, what it felt like and everything. And so in some ways, there are autobiographical sort of moments in the book, but the story itself is made up just to get the kind of the general feeling of the tenseness in the story.
Absolutely. You could definitely feel that. So I got to ask you then, who is the audience? Who did you write this book for?
That's a good and tricky question. I would say that the audience for this book will be someone with, going back to what I was saying about Yoshihiro Suge, someone with a sort of a dark sense of humor. Everything that I do has like the sense of humor going through it. I mean, even though it's about primary school kids, I do believe it's probably for adults first. Kids can read it, of course, but I think to get the complexities in the story and what's really going on underneath it, it's probably an adult's book.
Right. Because you're an award-winning designer, an animator, and now a comic book creator, I'd like to know a little bit more about your creative process as it relates to this particular project. Did you come up with the idea first? You wrote out the entire script and said, okay, now I'm going to get down to drawing it. Or was it like a piece-by-piece type of thing?
Basically, the creative process for this was to go scene by scene. I had the very, very lightest general kind of concept of his arc, of his character. But beyond that, I had no kind of inkling of what was going to happen. And I built it up basically, like I said, scene by scene. And if you look at it, the design of it is very much like you might make a film or something where you have a scene which starts with a establishing shot and then goes into the scene and it goes on like that. And the good thing about this approach was that I could go back through and edit as I went as well. There are 100 pages of finished artwork that I've drawn for this story that I haven't included in the book, just because they were irrelevant once I got to the very end and I was able to go through and properly edit it down. I mean, it's a very painstakingly time-involved process, but I felt like it was a very organic process at the same time, and it just served the emotions of the story more than necessarily the plot, which I'm more interested in, kind of the emotions.
Right. So speaking of time, I have to ask you this now. I didn't quite get the sense reading it. Are you a traditional artist or a digital artist? Because if time is a factor, digital would be the way to go, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I'm a traditional artist. So I draw it all by pen on paper. And actually, I draw it all on photocopy paper. I'm not sort of worried about keeping the artwork afterwards or anything. But the thing about it is that I've got an A4 scanner. And so like A4 photocopy paper is perfect for this. And I've sort of worked out a format that works quite nicely. You can get 2 photocopy sheets per page.
Okay. And going back to the point in your bio about being an animator, I've asked this of others in similar situations. Is there a point where animation and comic book creation meet? Is there something that's familiar to both?
I would say for me, no. I find that what I create in animation is completely different from what I create in comics. Comics to me is a lot more introspective and a lot more kind of personal, and I'm able to sort of get lost in the process a lot more. Whereas animation is, maybe because I come from commercial animation, making commercials and things like that, it's always aimed at an audience. And so I'm always thinking about the impact on the audience rather than necessarily myself.
Okay, that's fair. Now, we've been talking about Tsunami. I've got to ask you, do you have any other projects on the go that you can talk about?
Not really at this stage. It was quite an undertaking to just finish Tsunami itself. It was very draining. Although I enjoyed it a huge amount, I've just taken a break from it basically and focusing on some more sort of animation projects at the moment. I would love to get back to graphic novels, though. I really enjoyed the process. It's just very time-consuming and very draining.
Right. Do you have any events planned, like festivals or conferences to promote the book?
Absolutely, yeah. So I'll be coming over to Canada in May for the Montreal Comics Arts Festival, plus also the Toronto Comics Arts Festival, brought over by the publisher Pow Pow Comics. Yeah, it'll be great to be there and to meet other comic artists. I'm really interested to see what it's like in a place which really respects graphic novels and comics and has a huge history in that medium.
So what are you most looking forward to when you come to Canada? Is there something that people told you to look out for this or that, or are you just going to wing it and see what you think?
A little bit of winging it and see what I think, but I do have friends who have been to Canada and have met other comic artists over there. And they do say that there's a fantastic community of underground comic artists, but also an established comic artists and stuff like that. So that's mostly what I'm interested in seeing and talking to people and just getting a sense of being amongst it, really. In New Zealand, where I'm from, it's kind of a much smaller endeavor. I don't get to see other comic artists that often. We're spread out throughout the country. It would be wonderful to be amongst other comic artists in Canada.
Yep, something to look forward to for sure. So where do you recommend that people go online to find out about your current and your future work?
You can go to my website, which is oneedo.com. That's oneedo.com. And that's where I have my illustration and my animation. Plus also there'll be links to social media there if anyone's interested.
Thanks to Ned for the chat. You can discover more about Ned Wenlock online at oneedo.com. That's oneedo.com. And on Instagram at instagram.com/Ned Wenlock. You can discover more about Tsunami on the Pow Pow Press website. And thank you for tuning in to the True North Country Comics podcast. I invite you to visit the True North Country Comics website to listen to even more conversations with creators and learn about their insight on making comic books and graphic novels. I encourage you to visit the website so you can subscribe and be notified about new podcast interviews and article posts. This podcast is available wherever podcasts are enjoyed. Please like, follow, and subscribe. You can follow along True North Country Comics on most social media sites, and you can send any and all feedback to John at truenorthcountrycomics.com. Thanks for tuning in, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2025.